Hi, I'm Sydney, and today I'm going to be talking about Netflix's original film, 1922. This film was originally released in September of 2017, and it's based off of Stephen King's novel of the same title that came out in 2010. I really loved this movie. This film obviously takes place in 1922 in Hemingford Home, Nebraska. This movie is starring Thomas Jane, who also starred in The Mist, which I loved, which is also another Stephen King book film adaptation, and he really dissolved into his character in this movie, and I didn't even recognize him at first, to be honest. He really carries his facial features differently in a very committed way that I completely believed his character. So Thomas Jane plays Wilfred Leland James, who's married to his wife Arlette. He's in the midst of a really cold marriage, and Arlette has inherited some land and a house. There's a lot of turmoil in their marriage because Arlette wants a divorce, and she also wants to sell the property to move to the big city or to Omaha and to open a dress shop, while also taking along their 14-year-old son, Henry.
You, my son, are coming with me.
This does not sit well with Wilfred, and he decides that the only way he's going to be able to keep the land and his son is to murder his wife. He manipulates Henry into thinking that this is the only option as well, and they murder Arlette, and the rest of the movie ensues with the repercussions of this decision. Wilfred, in the beginning particularly, is completely driven by self-interest and narcissism, especially in the way that he's very manipulative with his son Henry. I really appreciated the way that they filmed the murder in this film. I felt it was very honest as opposed to just going for shock value. The act of the murder itself is shocking enough, and I think that kind of stands on its own. Wilfred fails to kill Arlette by slashing her throat once, so he ends up having to do it twice, and the whole thing is just really sad and horrific. And then once again we are pointed to Wilfred's narcissism when he says,
"Murder is sin, murder is damnation, but murder is also work."
It's just like, bro, you just committed a murder and you're already complaining. Like, this guy just has no remorse for what he's just done. He's just complaining about the more work he has to put into it. But in that sense too, I do appreciate the realism in that sense of the process that has to go into after they've committed this act regarding the cleanup and trying to cover it up and the thought process that goes into that. This leads us though to the true symbol throughout the film. Arlette's body is dumped into their well, and Wilfred goes back later to dump some more of her belongings into the well, and he sees her rotting corpse being eaten by rats. It's super disgusting, but more than that, it's representative of Wilfred's guilty subconscious that's going to be eating away at him as well. Throughout the film, at that moment, he's able to throw a suitcase at them. Later, he tries to cement a pipe to prevent them from getting out of the well, and then he is at one point able to squash them. But as the film goes on, the rats are something that he kind of learns to accept infiltrating around him as he's also starting to accept what he's done. So in short terms, this is really a film about consequences, I believe. And so yeah, this story is pretty devastating. It's not a happy film. While there are some ghostly elements with the story, with his wife and his son coming back as ghost zombies and the rats tormenting him, I really like that this story plays with the idea of that you can be the monster. Because in the end, his biggest fears were himself and the actions that he had committed and the consequences because of that. I love Wilfred's journey throughout this film because he really does start so hard-hearted and just like committed and driven, but by the end he's very fragile and alone and just docile and just scared. In the end though, there is an acceptance from him that I found really satisfying. The last line of the film from Wilfred is, "In the end, we all get caught." But like, he actually didn't get caught. He caught himself, if that makes sense. So it's not just this like revenge ghost story, but it's this story of very human consequences and regret. One of the other things that I really loved in this film was the use of sound and score. There was this motif throughout the film of these very distorted high string instruments. The first time we hear them are when Henry and Wilfred are colluding their plan, and we don't hear them speaking, but we just hear the strings and we know what's happening. We hear them later again when Wilfred's grabbing the knife before the murder. And then it's also really beautifully used, even though it's like creepy sounding, when Wilfred's home alone and he's just like sitting in his chair and he's at this point completely alone. And the music overlaying that, I feel like sometimes silence can speak volumes, if that makes sense. So the music, I think, informs that idea there. I also like that there's a little bit of found music, meaning music found in that time period, particularly the first time that we see Arlette's zombie ghost, we hear some instrumental music from that time period, which was placed very well. Because other than that, there's actually not a ton of score or found music in this film, actually. I think those are kind of the only moments where sound really, like music really makes an appearance. So when it is used, it felt very effective. Overall, I really enjoyed this movie. If you haven't seen it yet, I highly recommend it. The acting is really well done, and I became very invested in the story and just believed the characters as they played out. While this film totally isn't some like jump scare / gore horror film, it feels like more of a human story of the consequences of actions, and it has a very simple moral at the end of the day, which is don't kill people. Thanks for watching. If you liked this video, you can subscribe for more content. Do whatever you want. Okay.